for people that have been here since the beginning, like Lena and Justin, what's the number 1 question that people ask our robotics program?
What can you do for robotics degree?
Particularly, what job can you get? And so I'm really glad that we can start up the Pathway Seminar again. Great starting speaker. And I think you guys owe a big round of applause for our inaugural Chief Program Advisor, Elliott, for taking this on. Let's get
Thank you very much. I am delighted to introduce our speaker, Leon Pryor. I have his bio here. I'm going to read it. Leon is a Detroit-based technology professional. After graduating from Michigan, that was BS of Electrical Engineering in 1997, he joined Microsoft, where he helped launch the Xbox and Xbox 360 game consoles and dozens of games from Electronic Arts, Microsoft Game Studios, Disney, and LucasArts. Leon is currently a senior video game producer for Meta's Reality Lab group, building games for augmented and virtual reality headsets. Outside of work, Leon is a passionate advocate for STEM enrichment in Detroit, Michigan, where he co-founded the Motor City Alliance, a nonprofit organization that supports over 100 robotics teams in Detroit and after-school programs, summer camps, and FIRST robotics competitions. Leon is also the coach of 2 FIRST robotics teams. We were hearing a little bit about this. FIRST Robotics Challenge Team 8280 from the School of Marygrove, and FIRST Tech Challenge Team 14010, Techno Phoenix from the Foreign Language Immersion School. Team Techno Phoenix recently made history as the first Detroit public school to qualify for the World Championships. That's fantastic. And additionally, Leon was recognized as Michigan State First Robotics Coach of the Year and runner-up for the award at the World Championships in Houston, Texas. I am very excited to have Leon here. I cannot wait to hear what he has to say.
All right, I'm going to deviate from the stated path. I've got some slides. I will talk about my slides, but I find these things work if they're more interactive. Like, I've got to work on really cool things, and I know when I was in your position, like that always interests me. So if you've got a question, like raise your hand. Like we'll break protocol. It's okay.
How was your day?
My day was fantastic, and I'll tell you why. There was actually a really cool detail, and we got a slide for that. So. Thanks for the introduction. Nothing to really rehash here. A lot of time at Microsoft for most of my career. Moved to Detroit in 2012 because my wife is from the city. This is a partial portfolio of some of the games I worked on. A lot of these are a little older, but Mass Effect was recently re-released, so that one should be at top of mind for at least a few of you guys. Age of Empires also was re-released recently as well, so that's pretty cool. Astronaut's Call and Astronaut's Call 2 are neat. Those were 2 early, massively multiplayer online games. Really cool thing. Like, I thought I wanted to get in computer graphics, but I'm really bad at matrix algebra and calculus, which is all computer graphics is. So I figured out, hey, these games have to have networking. So I ended up doing a lot of programming and building client server infrastructures for these games that you could actually play online. So I was never a graphics guy. I aspired to be, but. And then at some point, I had a little too much carpal tunnel, and I switched to a video game producer, which is just a way of saying project manager, right? So here's news today. An hour ago, my current game was just announced at Oculus Connect. So I took this from my phone. So Dragonfront Rising, developed by High Voltage Studios in Chicago, will be a Oculus title launching later this year. So I wasn't able to show you this before. So yeah, so this is pretty cool to see. I was literally like pulled over, like watching the unveil at Oculus Connect. But then I want to talk a little bit about the other side of what I do. And we were talking earlier. So when I moved to Detroit in 2012, I saw there was opportunity for someone with my experience and expertise to actually kind of step in and really help. I've witnessed a robotics competition where my son, we got a couple people. How many of you guys have been first? I've got at least 3. Okay, so this is a good amount of people. All right, so you guys know FLL, right? My son, but for those of you who don't know, FLL is First Lego League, which in Michigan is 4th and 5th grade robotics. mostly building, taking a small Lego robot, about 6 to 7 inches across, and executing an autonomous task, roughly 20 autonomous tasks on a time limit. And so I went, my son had joined this robotics team. At the time I was working for Amazon. I was, drinking from the fire hose, went to this competition, and it was a complete and total disaster, right? Just they were struggling, they didn't know what they were doing. I kind of came to this realization, if I don't get involved, I'm a horrible person, right? Because I have the expertise to help. So my son is like bawling, he's embarrassed, he's 4th grade, right? Just kind of really struggling through it. And I told him, I said, son, I'm gonna get involved, and I promise you, we will win something. I don't know what we're gonna win, but we will win something. And he refers to that day as the promise, and he remembers that, right? So he's a sophomore in high school right now, and he remembers the promise very quickly. So, since then, I became his FLL coach. He made it to the state championship. I became his FTC coach. I just kind of follow him. We actually were the first Detroit team to ever be state champions from Detroit. We won in 2 categories. We won we were runner-up for Inspire, which is like chairman's for those of you guys that do FRC, as well as robot performance. And then last year, actually was last April, we actually went to the World Championship in Houston. So that was a big deal. I took over an FRC team. We're only a year and a half in, but they already have an amazing trajectory. And I was voted, I got the Compass Award, which is the equivalent of Woody Flowers. And I was a runner-up for that at the World level. So number 2 coach in the world ain't bad. But how did this start, right? And I had a lot of fun putting this slide together, because even though like my career is very software focused, I have always loved robots, right? Like I've always like Voltron, Johnny Sacco, the droids from Star Wars, Macross, Robotech. This Robotics was like an early wired robot toy that I got for Christmas one year. Like I love that. And I think it's only because video games and programming were, at the time, in the 90s and 80s, were a little more accessible for you to, like, on your own. I could have a Commodore 64, I could write code, I could do things. It was a little more accessible than robotics compared to today, where I can buy like a microcontroller for like $1. You know what I mean? Like I can get an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi and do all these things. And I think today that door may have actually swung towards robotics. Like if this were, if I were young at this point. But I always loved this stuff, right? And it's always had, kind of a soft spot in my heart. This is currently my favorite video game. I'm in my second New Game Plus on Armored Core 6. Last anime I'm enjoying is the Gundam, The Witch of Mercury. Right, you see a pattern, right? I'm 50 years old and I'm still, and I'm still doing all this stuff. So one thing that I can give you, I'm gonna give you some advice. You can choose not to take it. But if you can make your passions your job, it's not a job, right? Like you enjoy getting up in the morning. I love making video games. That's my day job. I love robots. That's how I volunteer, right? I do work hard, but it's not something that's onerous, right? I never get up and say, oh God, I gotta go do some stuff today. Like it's exciting and it's fun and it makes for good life. But I kind of, before I kind of get to some specifics, I kind of wanted to say, like, what really drew me. And I told the story about my son, but my parents were both educators. And, my mom's a retired school teacher. My father, before he passed, was a famous Cleveland Public Schools principal. After Brown versus Board of Education, because I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. After the schools were officially desegregated by the Supreme Court, my father was the 10th or 11th principal tasked with desegregating public schools. So there's like absolutely famous, and I'm a junior, right? So absolutely famous educator in Cleveland. So even though all of their kids are engineers, because we said that's too much, you don't get paid enough for all that work you do. All of us have always tutored and helped people. And when I was at Michigan, I did a lot of work in the ELRC. Now it's called like the Lurie something or the other. I don't know.
ELT.
Yeah. Oh, so it's okay. Yeah. So I used to do a lot of work there. One thing that was really cool was my nephew came in behind me about 10 years later. actually did really well, came in on the Shipman Scholarship. And he was at an event for alumni. And the alumni were people that I went to school with. And they were all telling my brother and my nephew, I wouldn't have gotten to college without your uncle, right? Like I wouldn't have done all these things. He helped me teach me how to program C. So I've always had this this desire to basically, it's not good enough that I do well. It's I have to help the people around me do well. And that's what's really kind of like pushed me into robotics. But you know, it's interesting. These are just kind of like some of the accolades and some of the photos of our teams in Detroit and how well they've done over the years. But you know, the thing that's kind of laughable about all this, actually, I got to back up real quick. I talked about the promise, right? You know, I did that. So this is on the plane of us going to the World Championship, laughing about the promise. So it's like, so son, do you think I did okay? He's like, yeah, we'll call this one a win. So that was funny. You can just, you know, see he's huge now.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How many people had parents that participated with them in first? You the only one? Third? Nobody?
Kind of half of one.
There we go. All right. I feel like a bad dad now. So
It's you know, it's actually a lot, and it's one of the struggles that we have in Detroit is so you know, we were talking about your team. What was it? What team was it?
33-22.
33-22, right? They had 60 people, right? When you tell me I have a 60-kid robotics team, I immediately go to, okay, like $50 for shirts, food, logistics, transport, everything. And my head starts to explode. And the way those teams survive is they've got engaged parents, right? But frankly, the socioeconomic model of Detroit doesn't allow for that, right? Like a lot of times I got a lot of single parents, not all, but I got a lot of single parents. I got parents who are working double shifts. They can't do that, right? So I'll pick on some of my friend teams. There's a team in the Engineers out of Flint. They charge $350 per student to join the team. Frog Force 503 out of Novi charges $250 per kid to join the team. And that helps pay for a lot of expensive. I can't do that, right? I can't do that in Detroit. I'd have a team of 5, right? So it's having the involved parent is an absolute game changer, right? You know, when they can be. And then what ends up happening is just a black hole, and your kids graduate out, and you're still doing it like 10 years later, and you're like, what's wrong with me? And the coaches, we lament about that quite a bit. But what's interesting with robotics, though, is like, so I had all this interest in robotics, but it's like, oops, I chose the wrong major, right? So I was an electrical engineer who went into software and forgot, you know, almost all, like VLSI design, yeah, I don't remember any of that, right? So at least I remember enough about circuits and current that's actually been useful in terms of building robots and not setting motors on fire, which we've never done. I never set a motor on fire. Nope. Didn't do it 3 times either, right? So, but mechanical engineering, right? Like robotics is this really interesting fusion of multiple disciplines together, right? So I didn't know about what gear ratios were, right? Until somebody explains, like, can you drive a stick? And I was like, yeah, didn't you know what gear ratios are, right? But it wasn't until somebody explained that to me that I got it. So what I've been having to do is improve myself as I become a coach. So I'm learning this stuff a couple of days before I teach it to the kids. Right now I've done it long enough that I've got a pretty good grasp of it, but I'm kind of putting myself at like a junior undergraduate level of robotics, and maybe on some of the software side, I'm closer to grad school, but I've had to continue to improve, and that's also normal in life, right? Like what you're learning and what you're doing now compared to where you are in 20 years is probably going to be completely different, right? There will be a portion of you guys that will be engineers, like you'll stay engineers, you'll become architects, and companies will kind of highly promote you for that. But probably most of you will switch to management, right? Like you'll get 10, 15 years in, and they want you guiding other engineers, and to the point where you're like, all I'm doing is meetings and I'm not building stuff anymore. And if you don't want to do that, that's okay. But it also means you have to keep, if you want to stay that technical person, and even if you don't, you have to stay up on technology. So the thought of you guys not evolving, right, like you're gonna continue to evolve, right? Like the tech platforms and technology, right? When I came to Michigan, they were still teaching Fortran to intro students, right? Like Fortran today, like no one's using Fortran today, right? Like in fact, there are a lot of colleges out there that wanted to stop teaching C and C++ and just stay to the high level languages like Python and Java and C#, in which case Microsoft said, who's gonna write the compilers? And then we made sure that C and some of the lower level languages stayed around. But yeah, things are gonna change. Like AI is changing everything, right? Like you're probably not even gonna be writing low level subroutines in a couple of years. You're just gonna say chat GTP, here are my inputs and here are my outputs, go spit out a thing for me, right? So, but you've gotta be able to kind of roll with that. So expect to keep evolving. This has just been an opportunity for me to understand the mechanics of something that I've always found interesting on a really practical level, if that makes sense. No questions yet? Wow, you guys are like...
So now that you say that, I'm just wondering if you're like in industry and working, what are things like what do you do to like stay up to date? And like you don't want to go into management. What do you do to like stay up to date?
One thing is almost every industry has developer conferences and things like that. And a lot of companies, like I can say for a fact that Microsoft does. I spend a lot of time at Microsoft. Amazon does, and so does Meta, where they create opportunities for you to do that self-grow. So one, like you got to ask for it, because if you don't ask for it, no one's gonna like just grant it to you. But if you say, hey, I want to go to the game developer conference, or I want to go to this IEEE thing over here or over there, you can almost always get them to say okay, and half the time they'll pay for it, right? Because you're bringing those skills back to the company. Some of it you have to do on your own time, but also look for projects that may stretch you, right? Like you're basically saying, hey, like I really want to do generative AI, right? Like, so we've got, we did this in Amazon. We had a customer service chatbot. Actually, no, I got a better story in Amazon. So Amazon, I was working in a communications group at Amazon called buyer-seller messaging. So about 60% of the goods sold on Amazon are not sold by Amazon. It's sold by third-party people. And they have the problem is if I'm selling my goods on Amazon and you have a problem, how do I like process customer service, right? Because we're not going to give that third-party seller like access to Amazon database and tools. So we put a chat system in place. It's called buyer-seller messaging, where you can contact the buyer. Some of you may or may not have seen this. And the problem was there was a lot of abuse on it, where people were basically sending messages saying, hey, go on like WhatsApp and like give me your credit card number, and we're trying to take the transactions out of Amazon. So we started playing this game of whack-a-mole, where we would basically look for like the string WhatsApp, and then we would kill that message, and then they would spell it wrong, or they'd spell it with a $sign, and we'd catch that. And we were just kind of playing whack-a-mole, and I knew there was no way for us to win. I was just trying to stop the bleeding. But a guy on my team, engineer, basically said, I'm really interested in this machine learning thing, right? Can I go learn a little bit and see if I can apply generate a model to kill this? So we let him, right? There was a business benefit to it. He got to improve himself. His model killed 98.9% of the messages instantaneously. It was like you looked at the graph of like bad reports, and the graph literally like went straight down, right? So the money that we spent for him to take a couple classes was like a drop in the bucket to what Amazon was saving and our customers and everything else. So try to equate it in a way that there's business value, right? It's easier if it is at least tangentially close to kind of what you're doing. But the other thing is consider going to school. The biggest mistake that I made, and it was because I wasn't on that academic track when I was here. I was just like tired of eating ramen and I just wanted a job. Was Microsoft would have paid for me to go to grad school. And I should have done that immediately, like as soon as my feet hit Seattle, I should have gone to the University of Washington and knocked out my grad degree. But then I started making video games and snowboarding, and I was like, yeah, I'll do it later.
Do companies still pay for your grad school these days?
Some do. So it's I think Microsoft still does. Right. Yeah, UW, I mean, man, it's a fantastic school, right? So, and a couple of friends of mine did, right? And they did well, and a couple even went off and got PhDs after that. So, but I wasn't encouraged in that way. But here's a fun story in that. So I'm back. I'm working for Sword Technology. Anybody ever heard of John Laird? Right, so John Laird wrote the SOAR cognitive architecture. So it's an AI cognitive architecture. He has a company called SOAR Tech, which is like a mile that way. And when they found out I was living in Michigan, they created a job for me. And the reason why was they had all these great AI models that would do like pattern of life and things. It's like you're looking at a log file. You're like, look, that person's going to the store and they're buying things, they're coming back. And it was a log file, right? Like it wasn't moving people. So what they brought me on to do was to take a game engine like Unity or Unreal and actually animate these characters in an environment. So now you can see that person going to the store and doing everything and all these pattern of life simulations, which, you know, they all this like military and army simulation stuff, it's just video games. You know, it's the same stuff. It's the same game engines we're using for games. And that got people excited because there was actually a visual analog. I didn't have to have a PhD to read it. So I'm working with a guy who's a professor, and we're talking about building this training simulation for the Army. And I was telling him, I was like, well, we have to build the simulation in such a way that we're looking at the difficulty or the expertise of the user and make it just a little bit harder, right? A little bit past their capabilities until we train them, and then we make it a little bit harder. Anybody ever play Zelda? That's what happens in Zelda, right? You go in and you're cool, then maybe you find a fire sword, and then you see a bunch of ice monsters, right? Like they gave you the fire sword to use on the ice monsters. And they teach you all these skills. You learn to use a boomerang, you learn to use whatever. Then finally you get to the last boss. And the last boss requires you to like block his shot with his shield, throw the boomerang, close up, do the sword, stab him. There's like 8 tasks. But over the course of the game and simulation, it's taught you how to do those 8 tasks. So you're a savant. It's something you couldn't have done 40 hours before. So I'm explaining it to this PhD, this doctor, and he just looks at me, this annoyed look. And I'm like, Jim, what's wrong? He goes, that's called zone of proximal development. That was my PhD, and you explained it better than I did in my thesis. and it was just because I built things, right? Like, yes, I didn't go down to school. I took a different path to education where I built games in the marketplace. So there's more than one way to get that education. So that became our joke, is we would go to things and I would explain something and he would tell me what the academic name of it was, which actually happened quite a bit. So, but you know, I did martial arts for a number of years because clearly I don't have enough hobbies. But I had a great martial arts teacher because I noted that there was a technique in Kung Fu, which is primarily a Chinese martial art, that was very similar to a technique in Aikido. It was a particular grab. And my instructor said, well, look, it's the same mountain, right? We all have the same physiology. It makes sense that multiple groups would come up with the same solution. It's the same with academics. It's the same with education, right? It's one mountain of knowledge, and however you get there, you know, almost doesn't matter.
You have a question?
Oh, yeah.
When you kind of think about your own strengths and weaknesses, are there things that you have identified, I'm thinking strengths, but things that you have identified about yourself that helped you have this amazing career?
Yeah, I mean, don't run from your weaknesses. You know what I mean? Like be honest about yourself. Like, I forget stuff. I forget stuff all the time. So I just write it down, right? Like there's a good system called Getting Things Done. There's a book on it, but you can just read the footnotes, and it's basically, here's the thing, right? Like, I want to be able to get everything done, but it is impossible, right? Because there's always new inputs coming in. I can't process it all, right? But what I need to do is capture all those tasks, prioritize the ones that absolutely have to get done. You know, the ones that can do in 2 minutes, just do them. And the things that can't get done, I'm diligent about saying, not doing that today, not doing that today. And suddenly I went from a position of where I was letting things drop. So I don't drop anything, or if I drop it, I let people know, yeah, I'm not doing this because I don't have the bandwidth to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's the only way that I'm able to survive at kind of the constant overload that I am between like working for a tech company, you know, managing a nonprofit, working with 2 robotics teams. So just being honest about that, about myself. Another one, like I used to stay up all night to code, right? Like I used to literally I had a sleeping bag in my desk at Microsoft when I was in my 20s, and I would go to my wife, fiance at the time, she was still in Michigan. She would like call me at 4 a.m. to see at the office because she knew I was in here. Yeah, so it was bad. But I had to stop doing that because what I noticed, I started looking at my bug stats. And my code quality was going down the later it got. So after about 11 o'clock, my bug rate started going up. So it was actually, it's better off I just went to sleep, right? and then came back in the morning, right? But I had to be honest with myself about my code quality. I was like, no, I could do it. No, you can't do it anymore. But be honest about your weaknesses and in many respects, turn them into your strengths, right? Like I turn my ability to get overloaded and forget things. And it's just like, now I just have a system. I carry notebooks everywhere, right? Like, I mean, literally like the notebook's right here, right? And any idle thought, I just write it down. I keep it next to the bed. I wake up in the middle of the night. I just write it down and then go back to sleep because I know I'm gonna wake up, look at it, take a highlighter, prioritize the top 5 things that I have to get done today and make sure I get those things done first. So, but yeah, like a lot of times, like that takes some self introspection to be able to just kind of be honest about yourself, about your weaknesses. But do it, like know yourself, right? Know thyself. I just find that's really been helpful. Because the big thing is no matter what job you're in or no matter what you do, if this includes being a parent, right? You want to be someone that's seen as reliable, right? That people can, no matter what, know. Like one of the best compliments I had from my robotics kids, they didn't even know I heard this. They were talking, and I was in the machine shop, and they didn't know I was in the machine shop. And one of the kids says, well, what if he's not here? And one of the other kids said, Coach Pryor will never let us down. And I was like, oh man, I'm okay. And I won't, right? But yeah, but to me, it's just that brutal honesty about myself, about what my limitations are, and and I'm okay with that, right? Nobody's perfect. So I laugh, this slide, right? Calculus was behind you. I know you know this equation. So
Everybody who took 367 with me should know those equations as well.
But this is an example of something I had to learn, right? Like, okay, I got this stupid arm on this robot, right? Like, how do I get into the right position? How do I manage its acceleration and deceleration? Like, one of the things that my teams are known for are strong autonomous modes, right? And for those of you who haven't done the first in middle school, it's 30 seconds. In high school, it's 15 seconds. But the first part of the match, the robot drives itself, and though it's the scoring, it's usually worth more, whatever actions that you do in that period. So there's actually videos of matches where my team scored so many points, my middle school team scored so many points in autonomous, they could have put their controllers down and danced for 2 minutes. Just because, but to do that, we had to have accurate movement, right? Like I had to be able to within a millimeter, guarantee that robot was getting into the right place. And I got 11-year-olds doing this, right? So this is cool. This is our high school robot this year. The game was picking up cones and cubes and placing it on kind of a shelf where there was basically like a 3.5-foot horizontal and 3.5-foot vertical distance that you had to place it. We built a differential drive that allowed us to move in multi-directions. We used virtual 4-bar and a chain so that we had a claw mechanism that would stay in the same orientation the whole way. It started with a claw, which I hate claws, like they're awful. I was trying to do wheel-based systems, which we did ultimately replace here, where we cut out some polycarb. So then now there was kind of more of an active intake. And then there's that robot in action over there. So all of these kids in the corner, only 2 of them had touched a robot. So I had complete squad of rookies, and they learned fabrication, programming, computer vision, all in the course of a few months, right? It's interesting because the comments that I've gotten from very established coaches, the rush coaches, 33 coaches are like, yeah, the trajectory of your team scares us, right? Because you're getting good really fast. And in FIRST Robotics, we have this obsession with numbers. Your number is the sequence by which your team was created. So if your team is, their team is roughly 15 years old. Teams in 2000s are about 20. Teams with double digits are 33 years old. So we are the 8,280th team, ever created. So these kids came around like really, really fast. And a lot of them want to come here. So,
Robotics majors, multiple paths of knowledge, right?
and here are my middle school kids, right? Like they drew this, not me, right? Like they drew, they wanted to have a wheeled intake, also on a 4-bar. They built some prototypes. Here was their first robot. So you can see the chain's got a 4-bar. It picks up these cones, brings it to the middle. There's kind of a claw that would grab it. There were poles that were up to 4 feet tall. So these were linear slides, so it could actually reach up, kind of drive over that pole, and then drop it. That's really worked. This is kind of that system kind of all together. And then for the World Championship, they actually simplified it. They got rid of this entire mechanism in the back in favor of just putting the lift and an intake in the front. And they actually put lasers on there. So laser rangefinders. So as soon as the laser rangefinder got to a certain distance, the intake was automatic. So this system here, intake being the time that it takes to pick up an object, took roughly 5 or 6 seconds. This was 0.79, and that's when we took the World Championship. So 11, 12, 13 years old at that point. There's also a camera, there's some computer vision work on it, probably a good dozen sensors. So, a lot of people look over kids in Detroit and saying they can't do these things. And it's just like, yes, they can. They just need to be shown. Motor City Alliance. So this is an interesting thing. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart. As my teams were doing better, I said it's great, but at the time I was working for Amazon, Amazon's got a set of great leadership principles. Like if you just look up Amazon leadership principles, you can see the list of them. I highly recommend reading. And if you ever want a job, and there are robotics jobs at Amazon, by the way, like the entire fulfillment center is run by robots. I'll tell you a story about that as a sidebar. It used to be they had people that were called pickers, and they would go all over the warehouse to like put the books on shelves and things like that. What they would do is they would put it anywhere, and then they would note the position. Well, those are the placers, and then the pickers would come through, and they had a handheld channel and said, okay, the Harry Potter book is here, and reach down. And the pickers were like walking 15 miles a day. And it was great because they were like, I'm in great shape. Like, my stomach hasn't been this flat in years, but it was exhausting. So for a lot of people, so they changed it. They bought a company, I think called Kiva, where they have these like Roomba-like robots. And what they did is they put the shelves on top of the Kivas. So now all the pickers stand in one place, and now they're all getting fat again. But now they all stand in one place, and the shelves just come to them, and they just pull the items off the shelves. So there's a lot of automation at Amazon in that regard. So, but anyway, the leadership principles, right? They're things like think big, insist on the highest standards, customer obsession, right? They're good things to just kind of keep in mind. And if you ever interview for Amazon, that's how you're getting judged. They're actually, so think about your resume in terms of what things in your resume may illustrate those leadership principles, because that is the recruitment process, right? And they don't even hide it. If you go to amazon.com/jobs, it shows the leadership principles. So, but I thought about the work that I was doing. How can I think big, right? It's great. I'm helping 20, 30 kids at a time, right? How can I help thousands, right? And insisting on the highest standards, customer obsession, all these things. So I came up with this idea of the Motor City Alliance, where I was learning all this stuff, and I wanted to federate it out and get it to the other schools in Detroit. So we started this with 2 other first teams, 503, who I mentioned earlier, and 5577, Kinematic Wolves out of Southwest Detroit. So we formed this nonprofit, and we service the roughly 100 Detroit teams from elementary school all the way up to high school. And we do this through events, Chad actually came to our annual FTC event last December and stayed for a few hours, which was great. We do free summer camps, and just, the idea is one, give the teachers a lot of times our coaches or teachers, get them the technical support they need, and two, just kind of show and demonstrate this to the kids that they can do well, and we have great KPIs. That's another thing. Be very honest about to yourself about KPIs, key performance indicators, right? Like keep score in your life, right? And how well you're doing. And one of the things I know is like for our FTC teams, we've more than doubled the number of state qualifying teams for Detroit, right? And we've maintained that for 2 years. So we actually have the numbers to support that we're seeing things improving over the city, and then that accesses the money. There's like millions upon millions of dollars of first scholarships that are available. A lot of these kids don't know that they can go, because of Detroit Promise, they can go to U of M for free, they can go to Kettering for free, they can go to Michigan State for free, they can go to Wayne State for free, and just showing these kids that there are options. So it's been great. Oh, you were waiting. So, actually, so this was funny. So I was here visiting last year, and was visiting Professor Wilhelm over in the electrical engineering department. And I noted him. I said, this is the equivalent of a graduate level engineering course. And he kind of gave me this, what are you talking about, right? And I basically said, look, it's an open-ended problem. There's no actual defined solution. There's no instructions. There's a limited amount of time and there's a limited amount of resources. And we're putting kids through that. And he kind of agreed with me after that. So that was fun. But things are going well. Our teams are going well. We're seeing, we had an event in an NCAA arena. So we had like robots on the Jumbotron. We're seeing mentorship across the board. We had Detroit Public Schools double our robotics team's budget. We're getting kids on college campuses. They're building skills in terms of fabrication, and we're just going to keep moving in that regard. So kind of bringing this back, right? Like for you guys, right? How can I make a difference, right? First is like continue to grow, right? Like this is the beginning of your story, and I guarantee you where you are in 15 to 20 years won't be where you think you are, right? Like you'll have plans, right? I never thought I'd be living in Detroit, right? Mentoring multiple robotics teams, working for Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like all of these things, like I didn't consider. So your adventure is going to be much different than you can hope. So just like always be open to growth, always be open to change. Sometimes things that I didn't think that I wanted to come back to Detroit, I should come to Detroit because I was never from here, it was my wife. I did, and it opened up all these doors. I'm doing all this good. I'm doing all these things that really make me feel good about myself and excited about the things that I'm doing. Consider giving back, and it's not something that you have to wait to do, right? Tutor somebody, help somebody, right? Just make sure your friends are getting through their classes, right? Like any small thing that you can do. A perfect example was my robotics team. We had a Girl Scout event 2 weeks ago. It was a Girl Scout STEM event. And I purposely only brought women on my team to that event and just had them talk to the Girl Scouts for 3 hours. And there were a good, in the little forms after the fact that they filled out, there were 7 or 8 girls who said, I want to be an engineer now, right? And I'm really interested in it. And I was telling I was driving my girls on the way home, and I basically said, do you realize that you probably changed the course of someone's life? And they were uncharacteristically quiet for about a minute. Back but they're high school kids, right? And they had this effect on elementary school kids. So you guys have more power than you think in your ability to change outcomes for people. There are people looking up to you that you cannot imagine, right? Your peers even, right? So just keep that in mind, right? Embrace your passions. Like if something's fun to you, like find a way to make it your job, right? Like you guys are in robotics, right? And you like music, make robots that play pianos, right? Like, find something, right? Find some way to hook what you enjoy to how you live your life, right? It just makes life infinitely better. And forge great relationships. You just never know. A great story, a friend of mine, so I was a year ahead of her. And I had already been working for Microsoft for a year, and they sent me back for recruiting. It was just over in the Eeks building. We had a career fair, and she was in a line for another company. And I said, no, you're not lying. So then I walked up to her. She's in line to talk to like EDS or something, and I'm recruiting her out of the EDS line. I was like, no, you're gonna come to Microsoft. And she did. She came to Microsoft. She worked there for 15 years. She actually just went back. She left, went to Southwest Airlines, and now she's director in Azure Services. She just took that job a few months ago, right? And I put her on that path because I saved her from EDS. So, you know, but and it's actually funny. So we came back for where I mentioned earlier, my nephew was here. We came back when he was an incoming freshman to do a talk to students, and we're sitting at Pizza House. Pizza House still here?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so we're sitting at Pizza House because it was open. It was like 2 a.m. Right? So we knew they were open, and we're like, "What are we going to tell these students?" And I was like, "Let's tell them the truth." She was like, "They can't handle the truth," and we had a laugh. And so we show up, and it was Miranda and I, a professor and a TA on this panel, and the TA and the professor were like, you know, study hard and you know, rah rah rah, and you know, Miranda and I were like, never take a class alone, right? Because things are going to happen to you, and your friend needs to get your back with notes and things like that. I told them, I said, how many of you guys, because again, these are all incoming freshmen, how many of you guys have girlfriends or boyfriends? And like, you know, half of them raised their hand. I said, you guys are going to break up, and it's going to be bad for you, right? And if you don't have your friends to have your back when you're going through that emotional thing, you're going to be in trouble. Those friends you have will be your best friends after college, right? My friends like that were like people in my wedding, right? That stood up with me. So as a footnote, when my nephew graduated, most of those kids in that seminar came up to me at graduation and they're like, you were right about everything. So relationships are important, right? A lot of times you hear it's not what you know, it's who you know, and there's some truth to that, right? Like, you know, when you go to events like this and people are there, I always give cards away because no one ever calls me, right? And the people that do, I always answer, right? I always help. I'm always that contact. I'm always willing to do it. So take advantage of building those relationships because it does make a big difference. Yeah, any questions? That was my spiel.
Thank you. We have time for some questions if people have any.